Today, I'm going to teach you a counterintuitive way to catch liars. I'm Deception Detective. I'm an attorney trained in statement analysis, and this channel exists to expose lies and manipulation. Before we proceed, please hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell. In today's video, we're going to look at Kate and Jerry McCann's first interview about their missing daughter, Madeline. And we're going to look for signs that their story is scripted. And I'm going to teach you a way to detect a fake scripted story that's going to seem counterintuitive to you. Let's listen. Also, I've not listened to this interview before, so I'm going to try to find the right spot to mention this lesson. So let's look for any signs of deception, and then when we hit on what I want to teach you today, we'll get into that. There's a little preview of it here.
Jerry and Kate, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. I'd like to begin by taking you back to the events of May the 3rd on that evening. Tell us how you discovered that Madeline had gone.
As I think people are aware, we were checking regularly on the children, and it was during one of my checks that I discovered she'd gone. I mean, I can't really go into any details about that, but
already this is a red flag to anyone who should have seen this interview at the time. Put yourself into Kate McCann's shoes. Her daughter is allegedly missing, is allegedly kidnapped. That's their story. You would think that since she has a platform on TV to talk about that, she would talk about noticing Madeline was gone in great detail. Every tiny detail she knew about that night. Every person she saw on her way, maybe on the staircase in the resort, on her way there and her way back. Anything that might help people find Madeline. But instead, I'm actually surprised by this. They're being so reticent about telling the story, it might actually ruin my plan for this video. Instead, she is saying she cannot talk about the details of the night Madeline went missing. That is totally counterintuitive if you believe that they are innocent. However, if you think that they accidentally killed Madeline like I do and then hid the body, it makes perfect sense because they understand that the more they tell their story, the more likely it is that they might contradict themselves or say something that might be contradicted by the evidence down the road. And this is why lying is so difficult. So already, even if I was watching this back on the 25th of May, 2007, that would be a giant red flag. And I think the Portuguese police also saw this as a red flag. I think initially they suspected the McCanns and they were correct about that. That is my opinion.
I'm sure any parent will realise how that felt.
Did the panic set in immediately?
Yeah, pretty much.
This is a resort that offers childcare facilities, babysitting facilities. Why then were the three young children left alone in the apartment while you were having a meal?
I mean, I think if you know the location here, which you've seen, what we did, I think, and we've been reassured by the fact in the thousands of messages from people who've either done exactly the same or said they would have done the same. And for us, it really wasn't very much different to having dinner in your garden and the proximity of the location. I think it's fair to say that, the guilt that we feel having not been there at that moment, irrespective of whether we had been in the other bedroom or not, will never leave us.
Do you blame yourselves regularly?
Certainly the first few days, I think the guilt was very difficult.
One thing I suspect, if you've seen my McCanns playlist, this is not the first video I've done on the McCanns. This is, I think, the 8th video I've done on them. So we've looked at 3 interviews of them. We looked at one interview that was recorded about 5 years later, I think, with Piers Morgan. We looked at an interview they did about 6 months after Maddie went missing with a Spanish TV station. And we looked at an interview they did, I think, a couple years after Maddie went missing, like 2 or 3 years, on a Norwegian talk show, or a Swedish talk show. I think Swedish talk show with a Norwegian host, based on the comments. And Kate's story has been consistent the entire time regarding the night she found Maddie. So I'm waiting for her to tell that story so I can show you how you can tell that it's scripted. However, one thing I notice across all these interviews is when it comes to the matter of guilt, Kate expresses a lot more remorse about what happened that night, which is why I suspect that Kate is the one who administered the sedative to Madeline that probably killed her. And that's also why Kate stopped practicing medicine, because she could no longer trust herself. And I don't think Jerry had anything to do with the actual death. I think what Jerry did was actually get involved. He realized that Madeline was dying, and then get involved to protect Kate and protect his family unit by ensuring that he and Kate do not go to prison for negligence, for negligently killing Maddie. And he took charge from there, which is why he takes these questions that talk about guilt over going out to dinner and leaving the children. But Kate mentions her personal guilt. When Kate's talking about her guilt, she always says I and not we, or most of the time. That's what we see. So long story short, I think Kate administered the sedative that killed Maddie, and then Jerry took charge and sat Kate down and scripted the story that they would tell people. And maybe this is too early for her to have the script totally memorized, totally comfortable to say it on TV, which is why we saw her reticence about even getting into the details of that night. Because in future interviews, she does tell that story, and she tells it beat for beat exactly the same way, which is the red flag, which I will get into later in this video. I'm just waiting for them to give me a good opportunity. So that basically, if you haven't seen my other videos, fleshes out my theory about the McCanns. I think Kate administered the sedative, Jerry found Madeline dying, and then Jerry took charge of the situation, scripted the story of Kate, disposed of Madeline's body somewhere cold, somewhere dark, based on his leakage. If you've seen my other videos, I think it's somewhere cold, a body of water. And in the comments, lots of you had mentioned that there are old reservoirs and old abandoned wells around that resort, which is very interesting. So I think that I didn't even think of wells or reservoirs when I first came with that theory. I was actually thinking the ocean, the coastline. And that's the beauty of these videos, that I have the smartest subscribers, smartest audience, and I think those are actually great suggestions. A well sounds like exactly what I was detecting in the leakage, a well or a reservoir or a cave.
But I think as time goes on, we feel stronger, and we felt very supported from that point of view.
Is there
The other thing here that doesn't make sense, Kate just said that they feel stronger the more time goes on. Now consider who would feel stronger as time goes on? Someone whose kid died tragically, or someone whose kid was kidnapped? If your kid was kidnapped, the longer your kid is missing, the more likely it is that you will never find them. So as time goes on, you would expect the parents of a missing child to actually get more and more concerned and actually feel worse and worse and lose hope, or start feeling less hopeful, right? Parents of missing children typically don't ever lose hope, but starting feeling less hopeful. But instead, Kate said they actually feel stronger as time goes on. And that is what I think that's an example of leakage, where she's leaking that she knows Madeline's dead, because that's the only way that response makes sense. And as I've said repeatedly in these McCann videos, the McCanns are not particularly sophisticated liars. There's a ton of leakage in their responses. So if you like this video, I suggest binging this playlist and seeing how I develop my theories over time. We did not start out with such a clear picture, but as we've seen more and more leakage from the McCanns, the picture's becoming clearer and clearer. And the oldest video I did is called How to Analyze a Suspect on the McCanns, if you want to start there.
Do you blame yourselves regularly?
Certainly the first few days, I think the guilt was very difficult. But I think as time goes on, we feel stronger, and we felt very supported from that point of view.
That is the wrong answer. This is not a sophisticated liar. This is not a Casey Anthony. This is a person who is not very sophisticated at lying. That's the total wrong response. If a cop heard that, a cop of any sort of pedigree, they should recognize that that means the mother knows the daughter's dead, and she's actually feeling stronger and stronger because she's getting away with the lie. So the more people, she's on the news now, the more people that are giving her a platform and seemingly believing her story, of course she feels stronger. She's still, of course, sad that her daughter's dead, but she's feeling stronger and stronger. She's processing the death. She's in panic mode, fighting for her life. And as I've theorized in other videos, I think that the parents see the lie they're telling as noble. They understand that if they admitted the truth, the twins would be taken away with them. They would both be locked up. The twins would go into foster care. So they can actually justify the lie they're telling. We can't go bring Maddie back to life. However, we can hide the body. We can lie about this and keep our family unit together. And Jerry basically said as much in one of these other videos where he was talking about the family unit blowing up, something along those lines. But Madeline was already missing at the time he said that, which made no sense. The family unit would have already been destroyed because Maddie was gone. But they changed their frame of mind. They understood she was dead, and the new family unit now needs to be protected. Also notice how Kate, just going back to why I think she administered the deadly sedative, when she was talking about the guilt, she didn't say we, but then she switched to we when she said we're starting to feel stronger. I think the blame for Madeline's death is 100% on her, which is why she stopped practicing medicine, why she expresses all the guilt.
Is there a lesson here, do you think, to other parents?
I think that's a very difficult thing to say, because if you look at it and we try to rationalise things in our head, and ultimately what is done, and we do continually look for.
Wow. If you've binged all my videos, if you've watched enough of my videos, that is a red flag. This is the father who is supposedly talking about a missing daughter. And I really need to do this video where I compare parents of actual missing children to the McCanns. Listen to the conclusiveness. What is done is done. That's how you talk about something where there is no hope of ever getting your daughter back. Where she's dead. It's done. The father of a missing child, it's just beginning. The investigation is just started. It ain't over till I get my daughter back or till I retrieve a body. But listen to the conclusiveness. This is only a few days later, and it seems like they've already processed a death because they know she's dead. There's not even a question in their minds, right? Could she still be out there? What's done is done. The other thing is, these interviewers constantly ask them, right, when they say, do you feel guilty or, bad about what you did? The interviewers are asking about leaving the children alone in the bedroom. Because if you believe the kidnapping story, that's what they should feel bad about. Because that gave the alleged kidnapper the opportunity to kidnap Madeline and then sneak away without being detected. However, the McCanns never express guilt about that. Because they know their decision to leave the kids alone in the bedroom was the right decision. Nothing happened. It was the sedative or however Madeline died. That's what they feel bad about. Leaving the kids alone in the bedroom is nothing to them. I think they think the people who ask you about that are stupid because they're thinking in their head, we didn't need to hire a nanny. It all worked out fine. No one broke into our hotel room. We're not negligent parents. We left them alone in the bedroom. Nothing happened. Because they understand that it was the sedative that killed Maddie. Leaving her alone in the bedroom is a non-issue to them. So listen to this red flag response. I rewound here. What's done is done.
To say, because if you look at it and we try to rationalise things in our head, and ultimately what is done, and we do continually look forward.
That is a gigantic red flag. Also, you'll notice this is their first interview. The wrong answers they give here are actually surprising me at how bad they are, because I've watched their later interviews where they, as bad as they are at lying, they actually improve their lies quite a bit. For example, they say scripted things like, "We hope to still find Maddie," even though they contradict themselves later in those same interviews. But here, they haven't given a good response to any of the questions so far, and we're 2 minutes in. This might be the worst interview they've done. And I know I'm pausing a lot, but that's because I'm actually surprised at how bad these answers they give to every single question are.
But we've tried to put it into some sort of perspective for ourselves. We're in a very safe resort. If you think about the millions and millions of British families who go to the Mediterranean each year, really the chances of this happening are in the order of 100 million to 1.
Notice how he's minimizing leaving them alone in the bedroom, because he understands that it was totally safe. You can see the disdain he has for this question. The chances of this happening were minuscule, because it didn't happen. No one broke in and stole Maddie. Their decision to leave her alone in the bedroom was totally justified, totally correct. Also, if it happens to you, this is another way you can tell that Maddie wasn't kidnapped. If a 1 in a million chance thing happens to you, it seems like a big deal. You don't rationalize the statistics of, oh, well, there's only a 1% chance of this happening, even though it happened to me. When an unlikely thing happens to you, if a shark bites you, you don't go back in the water for a long time. Even though you understand the statistics, it seems like a big deal to you. If a shark bit you, you probably wouldn't let your kids go swim in deep water, even though you understand the statistics, because it's a big deal to you. So if his daughter were actually kidnapped, we would not expect him to sit here reciting the statistics of how unlikely it is. It would seem like a big deal. Of course, let's say this were the only question, and I try to say this caveat in every video now. Let's say this were the only question that was asked. This was the response he gave. Would I think he's a liar? No. We have to look for multiple signs of deception before we conclude that someone's deceptive. By this point, I've analyzed, this is my 4th McCann video. By this point, I'm convinced, my opinion is, that they accidentally killed Maddie and hid the body and scripted a story to get away with it. And what I wanted to teach you guys in this video was something I talked about in a video I did a few days ago, how to spot a fake story, where I talked about the ways you can tell that a story is scripted. So the counterintuitive way to tell that someone's lying is actually their extreme consistency. And this is something I put in the members only section last week. If you haven't become a member, it's a great way to support the channel. I put extra content in the members section, and I actually posted this video in the members section so that members could post their own analysis and actually compare their analysis to my own one in the live chat during the video premiere. So that is going to be fun to see if they caught the same things I did. But besides that, here's the lesson for today that I want to teach you. I was hoping that Kate would recite her story about realizing that Madeline was missing. In all the other interviews we've seen of the McCanns, Kate tells the same story beat by beat, where she went up to the room at precisely 10 o'clock. The door was slightly ajar. She opened it. She couldn't quite tell if Maddie was in bed, but she didn't turn on the light. And I think she says she didn't turn on the light because that light was probably visible from where everyone was eating. So she would have been called out as a liar if she said she turned on the light, because other people, witnesses might say, no, the light in that room never turned on. But no matter why she mentions it, she mentions that she did not turn on the light. She couldn't quite make out Madeline in bed. Then she went back to her room to check for Madeline without checking the bed. Then she went back to Maddie's room, and as she opened the door, she noticed that the window was open and a billow of wind blew the curtains at her, and she saw that the window was open, and she immediately knew that Madeline had been kidnapped. That story, across the interviews we have analyzed, has never changed. It is told almost verbatim, beat by beat. And that is the sign of a scripted story. Because true stories actually are not told perfectly the same. And new details, as counterintuitive as it might seem, are actually added when the story is retold. And they're not made, because it's a true story, they're not contradictory details. They're just other details the person remembers due to something known as the reminiscence effect. So as the McCanns, for example, learned more in the course of those 5 years between this interview and the other interview, there might be other things that stood out to them as more important, as other suspects were suggested, or new details emerged, or new evidence was collected. And they might search their memories and actually come up with details they didn't think of before based on this new evidence, or based on new factors that they just considered over time. And the story might evolve slightly, where she might mention, Madeline's favorite stuffed animal was actually on the other side of the room, or was near the doorway. I didn't even think about that before. Maybe he came in through the window but left through the front door. Or the front door, now that I think about it, was unlocked. I think it was unlocked. So I came in through the unlocked door. The reminiscence effect is the reason that true stories actually evolve over time and new details are added. And by new details, I mean details that are not contradictory and are not necessarily self-serving either. So that's how you can tell the difference between a true story and a scripted story. A scripted story stays the same across years, like the McCanns have. Beat for beat, it's very vanilla. There's no sign of reminiscence effect because they're not actually remembering anything. They're just sticking to a script to save their own skins, right? They made up an alibi and they have to stick to it because they cannot contradict each other. And then there's more stuff like unique details, etc., which I covered in my other video. Sensory details, non-self-serving details. So if you want to learn more about that, how to spot a fake story is the video for you. But right here, I was hoping Kate would tell that story here so we could actually see how it has not changed ever since their first interview. And maybe she will. We still have some time to go in this interview. So hopefully she will, so it can illustrate that point.
I think at worst we were naive. We're very responsible parents. We love our children very much. And I don't think any parent could ever imagine or consider anything like this happening.
Were you aware of the big public debate that went on in the immediate aftermath, and were you hurt by that?
Yeah,
naturally.
No one hurts you as much as the hurt that we had. But, we've tried to remain very positive in our outlook. And even small levels of criticism make that hard when you're trying to do everything in your power to get your daughter back.
I know you've been very supportive of the Portuguese police investigation, but is there anything that you feel could have been done better, particularly in those crucial first 24 hours when Madeline was missing and perhaps it was treated as a simple missing child as opposed to an abduction?
I think, we are not looking at what has been done, and I don't think it helps at this stage to look back at what could and couldn't have been done. I think it's...
Notice the finality in everything he says. Nothing we do now could help. He's leaking that he knows she's dead, in my opinion. And like I say, let's say this were the only interview I've seen, it would be a bunch of red flags. I would not be this conclusive or opinionated. It's only because I've seen so many interviews of them now that everything they say echoes across all the other interviews I've seen, especially the conclusiveness of the McCanns, the lack of hope they have for ever recovering her, even this early on. is just astounding to me.
I think it's fair to say we expected a very British-style response that you would expect if you were in a big metropolitan city. But you have to put it in context that we're in a tiny resort. But that aside, the times for these lessons to be learned will be after the investigation is finished and not now. It's an ongoing investigation which has huge resources both from Portuguese and the British. They're working very, very closely with lots of expert help, and I know there's hundreds of pieces of information continuing to come forward, and I would strongly like to emphasise we would like anyone who's been in here in the 2 weeks leading up to the abduction to come forward if they have not already done so and upload their photographs, because we want Madeline back and people can still influence that.
Looking back, did you see anything suspicious in the days leading up to her abduction? Did you notice anything? Have you been racking your brains to try to think whether people might have been watching?
This is a good question. And this goes to the reminiscence effect. Is there anything they've considered since the abduction that stands out to them? And like the example I gave earlier of reminiscence effect of the parents of a missing child would be them talking about any shady person they saw. For example, the example I gave in another video was a guy wearing sunglasses at night when she was walking to the room. Anything along those lines. Someone who didn't look like they belonged at the resort. Any small thing. Or I think I remember actually seeing the light turn on in the bedroom earlier in the night after Matt checked. So let's see if they reply demonstrating some reminiscence effect, or if they do not supply any other details and only talk about their alibi. Remember, since day one, they have been insistent that Madeline was kidnapped. They have not entertained any other options about anything that happened to her, which is a sign of a hoax. When someone doesn't know what happened, all options are open. If someone's trying to manipulate you and direct the narrative, they will only point to their alibi. In this case, the McCanns have created a script of an alibi where some third party, some random vagrant who will never be found, came in through the window, took Madeline, and disappeared into the mist. And even though they don't know who this person is, none of their friends could have done it. None of the hotel staff have done it. They said this with their own words, right? They never pointed the finger at their friends. They never pointed when they were asked directly if they think the hotel might have had something to do with it, they said no in other interviews, which is absurd. Because if you don't know what happened, everyone's a suspect. And they have not even pointed the finger at each other. So let's see how they answer this. If they are hoaxers, which I think they are, right? I think their alibi hits all the criteria of a hoax. They want you to believe in something and they're insistent you must believe this because they know if you don't believe it, the finger will point back at them. So if they're hoaxers, the only details they might mention here are ones that point towards some random third-party kidnapper who will never be caught. It will not be some reminiscence about some shady hotel staff or something Matt said when he came back from checking on the children.
We didn't.
If we did, we wouldn't tell you because it may be important information, but we didn't,
Wow, this is almost too on the nose. They actually answered even worse than I imagined they could have answered. Let's see. And then they said we couldn't tell you. Let's listen to the question again, the response. This is absurd. I think what happened is the Portuguese police understood the truth. And then once the British and international people got involved, they muddied up the case. I think they actually pushed the Portuguese off track. And why they did that, I don't know. Maybe people don't like being seen as heartless by accusing the parents of a missing child of doing it to her. But the fact of the matter is, if your goal is to get to the truth, like mine is, you have to have the skills to detect lies and truth, And that can be taught. That's why I'm teaching you on this channel. But you cannot teach the courage to stick by your conviction. So even if you know the truth, you have to be able to stick by the truth through thick and thin. And I think that the British people who got involved, or the Portuguese police, someone got bullied into feeling bad about accusing the parents, and they were dropped as suspects far too early.
And people can still influence that.
Looking back, I mean, did you see anything suspicious in the days leading up to her abduction? Did you notice anything? Have you been racking your brains to try to think whether people might have been watching?
So he's basically asking about exactly today's lesson, reminiscence effect. Do they remember anything? Now it's later in time. They've been racking their brains, supposedly. The parents of missing children would be racking their brains 24 hours a day, thinking of any slight detail that might help. They would be calling the police constantly, saying, hey, I just thought of this. I saw this guy hovering by our room 2 days before. Maybe he had a beard. Maybe he's the perpetrator. That is how the parents of actual missing children act. So he asks them precisely about reminiscence. Have you remembered any details over the course of time since the first time you told us this story? And look at how they respond. This is egregious.
We didn't.
If we did, we wouldn't tell you because it may be important information, but we didn't, you know. It was such a relaxing holiday. And in fact, as a family...
Wow. No details, no reminiscence effect. Right here, extreme consistency. And I'll just read you this. This was posted to the members last week. Hopefully when the members watch this video, because I sent it to them a few hours ago to prepare, they look back at this note. So, and I'll just read it here if you're listening on podcast mode. Two people lying together face the challenge of aligning their stories. And here on the channel, I call this scripting. And one way to spot it, the one I wanted to highlight in this video, is extreme consistency. Genuine stories evolve with more details on later tellings, so more facts are remembered over time. This is known as the reminiscence effect. However, co-conspirators keep to a fixed script, avoiding added details that risk contradiction. In other words, the McCanns are in it together, and the best way not to get caught is to keep their story as rigid as possible. So right when Jerry sat Kate down and said, hey, this is what our story is going to be, they knew right then they could not add extra details. Because if they're ever interviewed separately, and that's going to be the next part of this series. I've been told in the comments that they've done individual interviews, so I want to analyze those next. They know that if they're interviewed separately, the more details they add, the harder it's going to be to align their stories. So, scripted stories are rigid from day one, and they're vanilla. They're very easy to remember, everything's logical, there's no unique details, and because it's made up, there's virtually no sensory details, like touch. Did the room feel colder because the window is open? We never hear that. Touch, taste, smell, these things all show up in real stories. And if you want to see an example of real stories, I've got a playlist called Honesty Benchmarks. And one of the videos on that playlist is Christy Mack, who was almost beaten to death by her boyfriend. And when she was asked, did he punch you in the face? She said, I don't know. Which makes sense because she was blacking out. But then she gives a sensory detail. But I tasted blood in my mouth and my tooth was loose. My tooth was loose. Totally sensory details. The McCanns, we get I haven't heard any sensory details in any of the tellings of the story.
Family unit up until that night, and with the friends we were here, certainly for us, it was as good a...
What did he say? He said they were a family unit up until that night. If Madeline's still alive, they could be a family unit again.
You've been racking your brains to try to think whether people might have been watching?
We didn't.
If we did, we wouldn't tell you because it may be important information, but we didn't, It was such a relaxing holiday. And
the other concerning thing, like I said, these are not sophisticated liars. Casey Anthony if you've seen my video about her, is a sophisticated liar. Or even O.J. Simpson, if you've seen my video about him, I think it's How to Catch a Troll is the title of the video. Is not sophisticated, but he's a flagrant liar. He can lie to your face, and he's not very good at it. He's got a ton of duper's delight, but he might even be a better liar than the McCanns. If you are doing an interview about your missing daughter, the entire point of the interview is to put the details out there that would be important to the case. So the fact that Joy says, even if we did think of something, we wouldn't tell you is very strange. It's bizarre.
And in fact, as a family unit, up until that night.
Sorry, let me rewind.
Anything suspicious in the days leading up to her abduction? Did you notice anything? Have you been racking your brains to try to think whether people might have been watching?
We didn't.
If we did, we wouldn't tell you because it may be important information, but we didn't, you know. It was such a relaxing holiday. And in fact, as a family unit, up until that night, and with the friends we were here, certainly for us, it was as good a holiday as we have had with the children, up until that point.
You have to keep believing that Madeline is still going to be found alive and well.
Absolutely.
Do you ever, though, allow yourself to drift towards negative thoughts?
I think in the early days we did, and I think that's inevitable. I think any parent who's been through this does that, certainly in the first few days. We don't now. We're actually a lot stronger, a lot more hopeful.
This is about the third time now that Kate has said any parent. Right? Any parent would feel this way. Any parent who's been this would feel this way, which is unusual. To me, it sounds like too much persuasion, that she's maybe read an article about how parents of missing children act. Why not just speak for yourself? That's how I felt. I felt that way. When people are telling the truth, they don't need to involve outside stories, third parties to corroborate their story. They can just say it directly. So, for example, in the early days, I did drift that way. It was tough. That's a much more reliable response than something along the lines of, well, studies show that parents of missing children do allow themselves to drift to negative places in the beginning. So that's what I did. It's unusual. So listen again. Listen, this is about the third time she's done it now. I didn't point it out the other two times. So if you rewatch this, I think you'll pick that up. I think she did at least once or twice before. But it is unusual. It's too much persuasion. She can't just speak for herself. She has to justify her responses, it sounds like.
Days we did, and I think that's inevitable. I think any parent who's been through this does that, certainly in the first few days. We don't now. We're actually a lot stronger, a lot more hopeful now. And we have to be hopeful. It's what keeps us.
A lot more hopeful. I believe her. I think she's a lot more hopeful that she and Jerry will get away with it now. I think that's what she feels stronger about and more hopeful about, that they will get away with it. Because the longer your kid is missing, the less hope you should have, logically. That's why there's TV shows called First 48. If it doesn't get solved in the first 48 hours, chances of it getting solved plummet. Like I said, these are not sophisticated liars. Almost every answer they've given is the total wrong response. And I wonder if people are catching that in the comments of this video. So for example, they're pointing out, oh, well, what's done is done, etc. So people, I think, on an intuitive level can tell there's something wrong with the McCanns. I think most of the people on my channel, my subscribers, point this out as well, that they always felt like there was something off. And I think what I'm doing here is pointing out why you felt that way. So putting a name to what you were sensing. For example, lack of reminiscence effect, or unusual responses because they're involving third parties, and what should just be a personal response, because allegedly she is the mother of a missing child. Why does she need to talk about any parent in this situation feeling that way?
Keeps us going and keeps us focused.
And what about Sean and Emily? What have you said to them about their big sister?
They're really good. I mean, they're at an age really where they're still quite young, and I guess it hasn't had the same impact on them as if they were a little bit older. They do talk about Madeline. They pick.
Another thing I've never pointed out before, but it's unusual. Across all these interviews, whenever they're asked about the twins, they always say they're really good, etc. But let's say Madeline was kidnapped. What if the twins woke up and saw something? Are they not concerned that maybe one twin woke up and maybe thought it was a nightmare, but saw their sister getting bundled into a bag and screaming for her life, or clawing a scary man in the bedroom looking like a monster? There's no concern about the twins, that maybe there might be something repressed, something they saw but didn't tell them, some sort of, that they're traumatized deep down by seeing Maddie get taken, or seeing the man coming through the window. There's zero concern that the twins might have seen anything or have any long-lasting repercussions from the kidnapping, because the parents know it didn't happen. Also, I never see them say something along the lines of, and this is a big one, we're so happy they weren't taken too. Thank God whoever came through the window didn't take the twins as well. At least now we just have to find Maddie, and the twins are at least safe. And I really hope they didn't even see it happen. I hope they slept through the night. You never see them express any concern that the twins were ever at risk of being taken, or ever at risk of having seen the actual kidnapping. I've never pointed that out in another video, but it's huge. You'd think at least in this early interview they would express something like that. But they are so scripted and so bad at lying that they don't even entertain what someone who is actually in the situation of a kidnapped daughter would be saying.
And they pick up things and say Madeline's, and that's fine, but they're really good.
I think that's, something that is, many people have said to us that this is a parent's worst nightmare, and it is.
Another thing people point out in my comments, like I said, I've got the smartest subscribers, is I see a lot of comments, why wouldn't the kidnapper take the twins too? Or if this kidnapper was kidnapping children for trafficking, surely if they were casing the family, the twins would be of a higher value because they're younger and more unique. Or surely if they were casing the family, Madeline would be the least likely to be taken because of her unique eye fleck. Should be the most likely of being retrieved, which are all good points. The case, and that's the thing, once you go down the rabbit hole of actually entertaining their story, more and more holes appear. That's why I like to just nip it at the bud. I don't even entertain the story. It sounds scripted. Since my first analysis, it has sounded scripted. And while I try never to be 100% conclusive, if I am betting on the McCanns, I'm stacking up all my chips except for one, let's say, and I'm going almost all in that that Kate accidentally sedated Maddie. Maddie died. Jerry took charge. Jerry came up with the script. Kate, at this point in this interview, is apparently still learning the script, or still not comfortable reciting the script, because she didn't actually give that scripted response. She said she can't talk about it, which is unusual. And then they buried Maddie somewhere cold, dark, and maybe inside of a suitcase or a bag or some sort of container to keep her weighed down. And we came up with that last bit based on some leakage, I think, in my last McCanns video. So if you want to see how this theory has evolved and why I'm very convinced of my theory about this and how it's crystallized, make sure to watch this DD vs. McCanns playlist.
Good.
I think that's, something that...
Let me rewind here.
I mean, they're at an age really where they're still quite young, and I guess it hasn't had the same impact on them as if they were a little bit older. They do talk about Madeline. They pick up things and say Madeline's, you know, and that's fine, but they're really good.
I think that's, you know, something that is, many people have said to us that this is a parent's worst nightmare. And it is, it truly is, and it's as bad as you can possibly imagine. But, you know, if all three of the children had been taken, it could have been even worse than your worst nightmare.
Okay, so I spoke too soon. So they actually do mention that possibility. And I was expecting them to mention it here in this early interview, so that's good.
And we've got to be strong for them.
However, I think he says other people brought up that concern. So it wasn't spontaneous from him. He says other people brought up that this is the worst nightmare. So let's listen again.
That's, you know, something that is, many people have said to us that this is a parent's worst nightmare. And it is, it truly is, and it's as bad as you can possibly imagine. But, you know, if all three of the children had been taken, it could have been even worse than your worst nightmare. And we've got to be strong for them. You know, they're here. They do bring you back to earth. And we cannot...
And this goes back to something I said earlier in this video, and I theorized in a previous video based on something Jerry said. I think the way Jerry and Kate justify disposing of their little daughter's body unceremoniously in a well or in a cavern or a cave or in the ocean in a suitcase is because they understand that if they came forward to the police, there is a chance they would be arrested for negligence, in which case their family unit, the twins would be taken away, they would be locked up. So I think they justify it, and he even used the word rationalize earlier, that they're rationalizing it. The way they rationalize the way they've mistreated Maddie and the lies they're telling is because it's for the benefit of the twins. It keeps the family unit together, those that remain. And I think I detected a little bit of leakage as well here. When he said back to earth, let's listen.
That this is a parent's worst nightmare. And it is, it truly is, and it's as bad as you can possibly imagine. But, you know, if all three of the children had been taken, it could have been even worse than your worst nightmare. And we've got to be strong for them. You know, they're here.
Right, we've got to be strong for them. I think by that he means they have to be strong. They have to convince everyone they're innocent. They have to mislead the police. They have to mislead the press for the twins. They have to stay strong for the twins. They had to take their daughter's body and hide it somewhere without giving her a proper burial for the twins. That was hard to do. They had to be strong for the twins. He probably said that exact same thing to Kate. Look, I'm going to tell you what happened. You know, calm down. You're shaking up. Calm down. I'm going to tell you what to do. You're going to say this script and never veer off that script. You have to be strong for the twins.
They do bring you back to earth.
Bring you back to earth. Could that be leakage? Possibly. Like I say in every video, when I point out leakage, it does not necessarily mean that I think Maddie's buried in the earth just because he said, bring you back to earth. Leakage is something that you have to notice a lot of instances of because it reveals what's on someone's brain. So when you're telling a lie, especially a fabricated lie, right? So a lie by commission, you have to invent something, and while you say it, you have to repress your memory of what actually happened. And under stress, what people tend to do is actually leak a little bit of what they're repressing of their memory, because memory is much stronger than imagination. And they can actually use odd phrases or slips of the tongue, what people might call Freudian slip, and actually leak the truth through their word choice. One instance of it, okay. But 3 or more is a pattern, is a great indicator of leakage. And it doesn't necessarily mean the person's guilty, but it means if you're placing a bet on their guilt, that you should be allocating more chips to that bet. Or, for example, if I were in charge of this investigation, Jerry has made so many water-related comments across the interviews that we've analyzed that, to me, it is very likely leakage. So if I were in charge of the investigation, I would allocate a lot of resources towards checking the coastline within a day's drive of the hotel, or, after reading your comments, any wells or caverns in the area. I think that's a great suggestion. The thing with a well is that, let's say the body were retrieved. It doesn't necessarily mean that the McCanns put her in the well, because then they can argue, well, we didn't sedate McCann. The kidnapper must have given her a sedative to keep her quiet while they kidnapped her. And then once they saw the big media circus, they dropped her down the well. So they could get out of it even if they're caught, which is why the kidnapper angle is so good for them. But because it sounds scripted, because the leakage indicates that they know she's already dead, it would not fool us here on this channel.
And we cannot, grieve. One, we did grieve, of course we grieve, but ultimately we need to...
Very strange. So he said we could not grieve, which is what the parent of a missing child would not even mention grieving, because they don't know if she's dead or not. They might cry or be sad. But then he says they did grieve. Grieving is something you do for a dead person. It's not something you do for a missing child. In fact, it's the last thing you do, because most missing parents of missing children hope beyond hope that they will find their kid. They're actually irrational. 30 years later, 40 years later, they say, I in my dreams, I can see my missing kid. I know she's alive. I know she's coming home. The grieving process happens when you know someone's dead. You process the death, you grieve them, and now you have catharsis. And I think the McCanns, because of the pressure of the situation, went through that process very quickly. So notice how he does admit here that they grieved for Madeline. Another red flag, another indicator that they know she's dead.
If all three of the children had been taken, it could have been even worse than your worst nightmare. And we've got to be strong for them. They're here. They do bring you back to earth. And we cannot, grieve. One, we did grieve, of course we grieved, but...
We grieved. So he tried to say the right thing, but then he corrected himself, right? We did grieve.
Ultimately, we need to be in control so that we can influence and help in any way possible. Not just Sean and Amelie, but the investigation.
And I think he's saying here exactly why they do so many interviews. So in my early McCanns videos, lots of people commented, well, if they're guilty, why do they do so many interviews? If they're guilty, surely they would be quiet. If they're guilty, they would never go on TV. That's wrong. It's the same way that murderers always typically try to be involved in the investigation. They participate in the search parties. They return to the scene of the crime. They want to be able to influence the narrative. I think the McCanns are petrified of losing control of the narrative, and I've said this many times in my videos about them. The reason they do so many interviews and wrote a book is because they have a hoax to push. They need for people to believe that Madeline was kidnapped. Because as soon as people start questioning that narrative or stop believing it, the finger points back at them. So all the press they do, all the interviews they do, it makes perfect sense for guilty parents. And a few weeks ago, I mentioned, hey, let's analyze an interview of the parent of an actual missing child so I can show you the differences. Do you know how many interviews I found? Very few. Very, very few interviews of parents of actual missing children, because they don't go on media tours. What they do is they're on the phone all day with the investigators, mentioning any details they have. Instead, with the McCanns, what Jerry just admitted here is that they want to be in front so that they can influence the investigation. They want to point the investigators in the direction of a kidnapper who will never be found, because that way the finger does not point back at them. And this is an insane admission from him. This whole interview is unbelievable to me. I knew they were bad liars, but this is another level. They have not learned how to lie yet in this interview. How to respond with well-scripted answers yet. Because even in later interviews, whenever they do give a good response, they actually contradict their response when they respond to something off the cuff. So they seem to always have a nice scripted answer for expected questions, but whenever they're asked an unexpected question or go a little bit, talk for a little bit too long, they actually contradict their initial response, their perfectly packaged little scripted answer.
Possibly imagine, but if all three of the children had been taken, it could have been even worse than your worst nightmare. And we've got to be strong for them. They're here. They do bring you back to earth, and we cannot, grieve. One, we did grieve, of course we grieve, but ultimately we need to be in control so that we can influence and help in any way possible. Not just Sean and Amelie, but the investigation.
I feel like this is a speech he gave to Kate. Oh my God, I oversedated Maddie. She's dead now. What are we going to do? Grab her by the shoulders. We need to be strong. We need to be in control, not just for the twins, but to influence the investigation. And here he said influence, and then he said and help. Influencing the investigation is the number one priority. That came first. And then he said help. Almost as an afterthought. This seems like an actual speech he gave to Kate to get her on board with their scripted story. The fact that he says here in an interview that they want to influence the investigation is insane. How anyone looked at anyone besides the parents in this case.
We need to be in control so that we can influence and help in any way possible. Not just Sean and Amelie, but the investigation.
And because of them, the day may come when you have to leave here and go back to the UK. I know you've got no plans to do so at the moment, but how do you think you're going to feel if that day comes and you have to go to the airport and fly back?
I can't think about that, Ian, to be honest. I can't think about going home without Madeline. So
I notice you've got Madeline's cuddly toy with you as always. How did that start, and what comfort does it bring you?
where did it come from? Or
No, how did the idea come to just have it in your hands all the time?
well, it's something that Madeline has with her every night, and if she's upset or not well, then she has Cuddle Cat, and so it provided me with a little bit of comfort. It's something of Madeline close to me.
This is International Missing Children's Day. I mean, I guess Madeline...
The thing with Kate's answer there is I think it's true. Like I said all the time, it's still a tragedy. Even if they over-sedated Maddie by accident and she died, it's still tragic. She's still a mother who lost a daughter, and now she has to hide that fact and point the investigators away from her and Jerry in order to protect her remaining children. So everything she said here about Cuddle Cat and how it's something of Maddie's and she keeps it close to her, I'm sure is true. I'm sure she misses Maddie. I don't think these are psychopaths. They're not good enough liars, in my opinion, to be psychopaths. Also, I'm not a clinician, so I can't diagnose them, but they're not heartless like... they're not as bold liars who can lie directly to people's faces perfectly like Casey Anthony and then update their lies in real time. These are not the type of people they are. And I've also started my Amanda Knox series, so if you haven't seen that playlist, check it out, because I haven't made a conclusion one way or the other about Amanda Knox. However, her composure is very unlike the McCanns.
Not well, then she has Cuddle Cat, And so it provided me with a little bit of comfort, something of Madeline close to me.
This is International Missing Children's Day. I mean, I guess Madeline's had more publicity than just about every missing child in the world put together. I'm sure you're very grateful for that. Why do you think it has provoked such enormous public support, of which I don't think we've ever seen before?
I think there's a conglomeration of circumstances that have come together in this situation. The fact that we're on holiday, very safe resort, recognised for that. And of course, the world has changed in terms of information technology and the speed of response, you know, in terms of the media coming here and us being prepared.
Notice how he said it's a very safe resort. If your kid was kidnapped there, I don't think you'd be calling it safe. And this goes back to what I said earlier. I think they think everyone who blames them for leaving the kids alone in the bedroom is an idiot, because that's not the reason something bad happened to Maddie. In their minds, they were perfectly right to go to dinner and leave her and the twins alone in the bedroom, because it worked out perfectly. Nothing would have happened. But what actually happened was Maddie was over-sedated. That's my opinion. And that's the guilt they're talking about. So when he says it's a safe resort, he's leaking. He knows it was safe. No one broke in and stole his daughter.
To some extent, use that to try and influence the campaign. But above all else, it's touched everyone. Everyone. You don't have to be a parent for this to have a major impact on you. And I think it's also been very, very important. And some of the things which we have done and said, which we didn't realise what impact they would have, but so many thousands of people are doing small things to help us find Madeline, because the worst feeling was helplessness, the absolute worst, that we had no bearing on finding her. But once you start to do that...
No bearing. Over the course of this Madeline McCann series, I've pointed out every instance of nautical leakage, because I think Jerry, when he's answering questions, is having to repress the traumatizing moment that he put Madeline's little body into a body of water, whether it was a well, a cavern, the coastline, inside a bag. And we've seen multiple instances of nautical leakage. In other interviews, he used the phrase, keeping my head above water, or staying afloat. Then he and Kate talked about radar. They also talked about thermal cameras. They expected the police to use thermal cameras to find Madeline, which was strange, because even if the thermal camera saw Madeline, it would just look like a little girl and her dad or her mom or her parents if she were kidnapped. So the thermal camera didn't make sense. But it would make sense if she were somewhere cold and the heat were dissipating. So somewhere isolated and cold, a thermal camera would help her be found. So the fact that he mentioned he expected thermal cameras was very interesting. And now we have him say he was finding his bearing, where if you're a sailor, you know that a bearing is your direction, right? Your course that you're going to take. And I'm a sailor myself. So this is lots of nautical leakage. Now, does this mean that Madeline's buried at water? Let's say we just heard this one instance of leakage where he said bearing. Of course not. My comments are filled with people saying, well, that's just how we speak in the UK, or just how we speak in Scotland. I lived in the UK for years. I lived in Scotland for years. Trust me, your English is not that different from American English. The rules of statement analysis and deception detection apply to any English speaker. Besides some exceptions for regional slang, for example, it's the same language. The grammar is the same. The phrases are generally the same. There is no phrase like get your bearing that is unique to the UK that we do not also use in America or Canada or Australia or New Zealand. So when I point out this leakage, it does not mean that, hey, he said bearing, so that's a smoking gun. Go search the water. It is something I'm adding to a long list a growing list of nautical leakage, which is helping me clarify my position on the McCanns and where I think the body would be discovered if it were ever discovered.
That, then you start to feel a bit better. And I hope we're going to look back at the end of all this and say that we have done everything in our power, but also that other people are helping in so many other ways and they feel that they are part of it.
Does it worry you that people might start to lose interest as time goes on, the media coverage diminishes inevitably?
For me, we know that the media coverage is not going to last a long time. It's lasted much longer and we have been much, much more successful in driving our message out than we could ever possibly have imagined. Personally, I think it...
Notice how he says we've been more successful in driving our message out than we could have imagined. The message they've been giving, I haven't seen them describe Madeline in this interview. The message they've been giving is that someone abducted Madeline. And I believe him. I think they have been way more successful than they expected in convincing everyone of that story and getting it spread out there. So lots of the answers he's giving, I believe, right? When I go into a statement analysis, I don't go in expecting to say, gotcha, you're a liar. I'm actually listening closely to what they're saying and accepting what they say because I understand how difficult lying is. 99% of the time, if someone's going to lie to you, they'll do it by omission, just by leaving stuff out. So 99% of what people say is true. So when he says that they are surprised how successful they were at getting their message out, I believe him. The only difference is I think he's omitting the fact that his message is that someone abducted Madeline, which is not a true story. Also, I think that based on answers they've said in this interview and other interviews, they thought that the police would actually, there was a chance that they would find the body. I think they were actually surprised how easy it was to hide Madeline's body. So the more I think about it, I need to give you guys credit. Maybe I'll do a post about it or feature another video. But the first person to, or the few of you who have mentioned the well theory, the more I think about your theory of a well, the more it lines up with the leakage and the fact that they thought it was very likely that Madeline, or they were surprised how easy it was to hide Madeline. She may in fact be in a well. Did the Portuguese police check every well in the area? That would be interesting to know. Because even if they did find the body in a well, they could still argue that she was kidnapped, which is why their kidnap story is so good. Because they could say, well, the kidnapper sedated her and threw her in the well. And it would be down to us and the leakage we've recognized to pin it on them. These embedded confessions, the leakage they're making, the way they betray their knowledge about what actually happened to her is why I would continue pointing the finger at them, even if the body were found and they were to argue that the kidnapper disposed of the body.
I think it's gone beyond that at the minute, and that there is a feeling with many, many people out there that they will not allow this to happen. And we know that, and we pray that it doesn't happen again, but when it does, the speed of the next response and the template we have set will alter it. And there has been so much goodwill and humanity out there that it really has restored, that one evil act actually has resulted in so much good.
Where do you go from here?
One evil act has resulted in so much good. That sounds to me like the justification they tell themselves. Right? Another justification. What we did to Madeline was truly evil because we buried her unceremoniously. However, look at all the good. That not only did it bring us as a family unit closer together, us and the twins, but it actually set us up financially for life. So, then that's a blessing from Madeline. It also brings awareness to other missing children, and we can be advocates for for actual missing children, but it's still good out in the world. It sounds like a justification of people who have done something heinous and are justifying it to themselves. If your kid were actually kidnapped, and it's only been a few days or weeks since the kidnapping, I don't think you'd be sitting there thinking of all the silver linings of her kidnapping. I think you'd still be distraught about it and frustrated with the police for not finding her, and focused only on your missing daughter, not worrying about the world at large until your daughter is found. It's yet again, it's another answer that sounds like it sounds good until you actually think about it. And that's basically what we do here on the channel. We listen closely to what is said, and we put it through the filter of either studies of statement analysis rules, or just the filter of logic, or the filter of comparing what someone's saying here to something they said in the past, right? So the filter of consistency and truth.
There's talk of travelling around Europe. Have you got any firm plans as yet?
We haven't got any firm plans. We're likely to travel in a few places in Europe, but as yet, no definite plans.
But you've got no plans to go back to the UK for the foreseeable future?
No.
That's how travel around Europe is bizarre. Is it a search? Are they searching for Madeline around Europe? That whole exchange is strange. But see, the thing is, the interviewer used the words travel around Europe, so it didn't really give us much. It'd be interesting if they said, yes, we're planning to travel around Europe, rather than saying, for example, we're planning to search around Europe in the hot spots of child trafficking to see if we can find any clues. Something along those lines.
I think that everybody has just been incredibly impressed with you as a couple and how you've dealt with this. There was a period after a week or so where you looked as if you were almost broken, and who could not understand that. And then there seemed to be a sort of a strength come from somewhere. Is that a fair point? Is that what happened, and what?
And I think that's when they both got on board and realized the debate was over. We cannot go to jail. Even if it's unlikely they would convict us of negligence for over-sedating Maddie, if the small chance that we'll be taken away from the twins and locked up in a foreign country, the twins' lives will be ruined. So this is their first interview, but I'd be curious to see their first statement they made, if they did like a police statement, and see how they're acting there. Because maybe if they were distraught at that point, it's because they were still debating. Should we admit the truth and just see what happens? Right? Put all the cards on the table. Because once you resolve to lie, there's no going back. Once you resolve to lie, then it's easy. Once they sit down and script the story.
What brought that about?
I think that's definitely true, isn't it?
Certainly, at the end of that first week, there was so much emotion that we had spent, and we actually had a period where we discussed this openly, that we felt completely devoid of emotion. And void. I know lots of you think I'm reaching. Void, devoid. A well is a void. Does his use of the word devoid mean Madeline is 100% in a well? No. Okay. But I am adding it to my list of leakage, suggesting Madeline is in water, deep cold water, or deep cold well, or deep cold cavern. And if you think it's a stretch, watch the rest of my McCanns videos and watch how this theory has formed across 8 videos at this point. I went into the McCanns knowing very little about the case. The analogy that I like to use is a bit like when we were students and you'd got to your overdraft limit and you'd gone beyond it and there was just nothing left in the tank. Also, I think physically and mentally.
Nothing left in the tank.
Were shattered.
Nothing left in the tank. Strange. Maybe one of you guys. The way I'm doing my new format now, and I think it's a lot more entertaining, is I'm seeing this video for the first time, and I'm giving it one watch and I'm pointing out the high level stuff, because the reason I came back to YouTube is I think the most important skill to learn is how to catch liars and manipulators, scammers, grifters, etc. in real time. Because rarely in life do you have the chance to record someone who's trying to dupe you and then go parse their words and do a deep statement analysis study of it, which I used to do in my old videos, right? I would do a deep dive into it and then present a video with very deep dive instructions. Here we're watching it for the first time. I'm giving you my first impressions. However, because of that, I'm not going to catch every little nuance. But the members of my channel are actually, and my other subscribers as well, are catching things that I miss on my first pass through, which is great, because when I read your comments, I get the same satisfying eureka moment, like when I read about the wells, that you guys get when I point out something that you missed. So it makes it more entertaining for everyone. It makes it more collaborative. And I'm sure at this part right here, where he talked about the analogy with being students or emptying a tank, I'm missing some sort of leakage. And it might be leakage that ties back to a fact that I don't even know about it. For example, is Jerry a scuba diver? Because I scuba dive, and one of the most common words we're using when we're scuba diving is our tanks. You're constantly dealing with your tank. Preparing it, checking the pressure, checking the gauges. And if you're thinking about a body of water and putting something deep down there, tank might be a word that comes to mind. So I feel like I'm missing something here, some potential bit of leakage we can add to our list. And if you're a member, I might actually create a running tally of nautical water-related leakage and put it here so we can all add to it. If you haven't become a member yet, I suggest doing so. It's a great way to support the channel, since so many of my videos do get demonetized. And you get to use all these fun emojis during the live chat when I premiere each video, so we can chat together live. And you get a little badge to indicate how long you've been a member, as well as extra lessons, extra posts I do here with a little bit more deep dive lessons that might not be as interesting to the casual viewer.
But, you know, as you gradually get more on an even keel, we started to get back into the black. And we'd also worked tirelessly behind the scenes to put support mechanisms in place, including our legal team, the response with the fund, which was really driven by offers rather than us thinking that we needed it. And once these were in place, then it helped us to focus on what we really needed to focus on.
Well, everyone who's watching, who's been following Madeline's case over the past 3 weeks, just wishes you all the best. Thanks very much, Jerry. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay, so this was recorded 3 weeks after Madeline went missing. And it seems to me like they've already processed a death rather than the heat of the search for a missing child. If you want me to compare the McCanns to someone whose child was confirmed missing, so someone who we know their kid was eventually found and kidnapped, let me know, because you will see a stark difference between that person and the McCanns. Also, I've thought about doing some 911 calls where we break down a 911 call to determine if the caller is actually guilty or innocent. So if you have ideas for other videos, please let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay true.